Hi, welcome to another Unitrends training session. This training session is for the install onboarding. Our first session is pre-installation tasks. In this session, we're going to learn about the pre-installation tasks that are required before your first installation meeting. The following tasks must be completed prior to scheduling your installation date. For the Recovery Series appliances, you must unpack the Unitrends appliance. You must rack the Unitrends recovery appliance in the data center rack. You're going to provide power to the power supplies. You're going to provide network connections. And you're going to provide a KVM or a local keyboard, video, or mouse connection. For enterprise backup appliances, you're going to download the installer software and install the virtual appliance. We're also going to show you how to complete your installation customer discovery document. When we first talk about unpacking the Unitrends appliance, you're going to actually let the appliance acclimate to the new environment. You don't want to put a cold appliance into a stable climate-controlled data center. You want to make sure that appliance, temperature-wise, will acclimate to the new environment. You're going to carefully unpack the server and remove the rail kit. Now, we're going to show you the instructions for the rail kits on the next page, but there is a note down there that Recovery Series 600 models do not include rails or a shelf. These are half-rack units in depth, and the rack, shelf, or rails must be purchased separately from a third party. When we look at racking the Unitrends appliance in your data center rack, you should see instructions in your Unitrends packaging that have images similar to these. And remember, appliance rails instructions may vary depending on unit height. Now, when we talk about providing power to the power supplies, just an important note here that if there are multiple power supplies, make sure you connect those to two separate power sources. They're set up for redundant power, not for power load. When we talk about providing network connections, plug in and connect to separate networks for each NIC in the back if you need to get to multiple networks. For web user interface management, only ETH0 is required. You'll notice that labeled on the back of the appliance. If it's a rack mount model, it does contain an IPMI connector. You want to remove that plug and connect to a gig switch port. Now, this is for the Recovery Series 714S and above only. And IPMI does require a separate IP address reservation for the IPMI configuration. Now, also, the number of NICs may vary depending on the unit size. Most units come with at least two NICs, ETH0 and ETH1. There may be more NICs on the larger units. When we talk about providing that KVM or that local keyboard, video, or mouse connection, once you have your appliance racked, it's in the data center rack, it's ready to go, you have to access or give it access to a KVM. Now, you can also use the old school keyboard, video, and mouse as well, too, if you need to go do a direct connection to the appliance itself. So let's take a look now at the Unitrends Enterprise Backup appliances. All right, so when we talk about the virtual appliance deployment, one of the first things you've got to do is off the unitrends.com website. You're going to go to the free trial link at the top of the page. Now, our website does change once in a while, but usually up at the top, you'll see a free trial download link. You'll click that link, and here in the form, you'll complete the form, and then you have options of how to deploy virtual appliances, right? You can start with either VMware deployment, probably the most common. We also deploy to Hyper-V. We also deploy to Xen server hosts. You can also set up your own hardware and deploy to your own flavor of Red Hat or CentOS Linux. Now, once you submit this form, you'll get the results page with your options of how to download. You can download EXE or an OVA template for VMware. There's also an option here to download our reliable DR. Now, there's also some documentation included in these links as well, too. The deployment guide for each of these is here. And you can also change the version. Maybe you meant to go to Hyper-V. Well, for Hyper-V, there's an EXE and an ISO format, and there's also deployment guides for Hyper-V as well. Now, one of the biggest things you want to pay attention to down here is setting up the best practices for your storage. So if you go to that link, pull up a document that references our knowledge base that goes through the best practices of setting up and choosing which storage and rules of thumb to follow for setting up those storage options. Make sure you follow this best practice article. All right, so now what we're talking about here is basically setting up appliances in Hyper-V and VMware. So if you look at VMware first, here's my appliance that I've deployed. It's a local source. You can see with some notes down here at the bottom that it's an enterprise level Unitrends appliance. Okay, now I've also set up the same thing in Hyper-V. You can see here my Hyper-V host. You can see I'm running a CentOS 7 and my Target UEB appliance. Right, could be a local source running on Hyper-V as well too. Now I want to give a little plug out for my other training courses. This is the same lab that my students use when you go through the system administrator and the installation professional for partners. This lab that we're using, I've already downloaded all of the Unitrends installable methods that we use in the course. So here's my Hyper-V folder with the ISO and the installer itself, and I've got the VMware folder with the OVA template and the installer itself here. Now I've got the installer downloaded to my desktop. I'm going to run through this really quickly for you just to show you an example of how this works. One of the first things I want to do is tie to my VMware host that I'm going to deploy this virtual appliance to. In this case, I'm running the VMware installer. Then I want to click Next. Now this is the appliance name I want to give it, so I just have to make sure it's a unique name. So maybe I want to deploy another appliance, so maybe this one's going to be local S2 UEB. Same host, same data store, doesn't matter. I can go through the options. If I tie to vCenter, I may see multiple hosts. Same thing here. If I tie to any different host, I may see different storage options. But this installer is really cool to help you organize the configuration is going to be set for. Once again, you're going to check your network and validate an IP address. You're going to complete the rest of your net mask and DNS and gateway information. You're going to click Next. Then it brings you to the storage configuration. If you know you want to give this thing 2 terabytes right off the bat, you can set up that storage right from the start as well too. Now when you click Install here, it's going to use those settings to create the machine. You'll notice that the only thing you can't control in the install is the processor and memory. When you run that installer, it's going to default to 2 processors and 4 gigs of memory. Before you power this thing up, you can give it more processor and memory if you need to. Once again, in the deployment guides, you'll find a rule of thumb for concurrent connections on how many CPUs and how much memory you should give each virtual appliance. Depends on the load you're going to put on it. There are slight differences in the Hyper-V installer, right, but the Hyper-V installer is the same basic concept. Now let's take a look at completing your customer discovery document. I'm actually going to start this session with a little bonus for you, just in case you lose the email or the link to this onboarding session. Up here in the corner of unitrends.com, there's the login area. You can log in as a partner or a customer, most likely probably a customer. Now when you log into the community, down here in the resources section, you're going to see My Training. This is where you can get to all the great content that we're creating around our certification tracks with the fundamentals and the basics of Unitrends through the system administrator, or the direct content. Maybe you need system administrator help and you want to go directly to a tutorial for a particular subject. They're all out here for you to review at any time, free of charge. Now this onboard session is a privately assigned training session for you, so it'll be in either you're not started if you haven't started anything yet, but I've actually started one of the tracks already, so mine's in my progress here. I can see the Unitrends install onboarding training plan, and I just want to point out to you that in this training plan, the customer discovery document for Excel, right, we're going to go ahead and launch that document. Now we're asking you to fill this out so it helps our onboard engineer assist you better. All right, step 1 is down here. Click on the index tab. Step 2, fill out your company information. Step 3, overview of your sites. Step 4 is the onboarding tab. 5, 6, and 7, we're going to go through those tabs and see if we need to fill those out. It depends on the purchases. All right, but this form's actually pretty easy to fill out. Starting with step 2 is just your company name. And then for each location you have, each data center you have data at, you're going to list that site's location. If you're the same contact name, put your name down. If you have a different main contact for each site, list those different contact and that different contact information for each of those locations. Now in step 4 here, it starts to break down each site. You may have to copy out a tab for each individual site. But in step 5, if you purchased a hardware or software install, you're going to fill out this information below for each one of the appliances you purchased. If there's more than 3, you can copy and paste the table above as needed. In step 6, for the environment, we're going to add up to 15 VMs and 10 physical assets. That's what we're going to help you install. So go ahead and list those assets out, the IP addresses, the credentials if we need them as well too. In step 7 and 8, if you purchased Unitrends Cloud and if you purchased DRAS, you're going to complete these sections. Now in here, if you need help with any one of these field or value, there are help and examples in here that you can hover over and see. Some key points in here that if you did purchase Unitrends Cloud, you want to make sure that you total up your server. If you have, so many physical servers and you're going to name them out, server 1, 2, 3, and 4, then you're going to put in the sizes for these servers each too. You'll notice here in the D and E columns, it's calculating the sums of those assets. Now you may also want to send to the cloud databases or virtual machines as well too, so you may want to type in that information as well too. Maybe you've got 250 gigs of SQL databases. Maybe you're going to send over Exchange. Maybe you've got a bunch of VMware guests. You want to go ahead and tally up all that data as well too. The biggest key here is make sure that you do not exceed your purchased value, your license value for your cloud limit. Down here at the bottom, if you're talking about DRAS, there's a couple of key points we want to make sure we get across to you. You want to make sure that when you fill this out, the physical and virtual column here, it's really talking about anything that we back an agent up with. It may be a virtual machine, but you're using the agent on it. We technically would call that physical. Fill this column out properly. And also we need the IP address, network mask, gateway. When we go and set up the VPN for you, we need those settings set up properly, or we need to identify those settings so we can properly set up your firewall for you. All right, this is a pretty good overview of this document. Once again, this needs to be filled out before you receive your appliance. Follow the instructions here in the opening screen. When you've completed your customer discovery document, add it as an attachment to customer-onboarding@unitrends.com in an email.